police station was always buzzing with activity, officers rushing in and out, papers rustling, and radios crackling with updates. It was a place where reputations were built, where rookies were tested, and where the strong survived. Chief Paul Maddox had been running the station for over a decade, and in that time, he had gained a reputation for being a tough, no-nonsense leader. He demanded respect, and if you were new, you had to earn it. That was why, when a new recruit walked through the doors, Maddox barely gave her a glance before making up his mind. She was too small, too quiet, and looked more like a college professor than someone who could handle the rough streets of the city. He scoffed when she introduced herself. "Harper Lewis? You're the new recruit," he said, crossing his arms as he looked her up and down. "You sure you're in the right place? The library's down the street." A few officers standing nearby chuckled, nodding along with their chief. Harper didn't flinch. She simply smiled, keeping her hands behind her back, and said, "I assure you, sir, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Maddox rolled his eyes and shook his head. "We'll see about that," he muttered before turning his back on her. "All right, rookie. You've got a lot to prove. Get your gear and be ready for patrol, and try not to slow anyone down." The next few weeks were brutal. Maddox made sure Harper was pushed harder than the others. She was given the toughest cases, the most difficult assignments, and the least cooperative officers to work with. If she showed even the slightest hesitation, Maddox was there with a sharp remark. "Maybe you should try dispatch instead. That might be more your speed. Do you even know how to hold that gun properly? Stick to the paperwork, Lewis. Leave the real police work to us." But Harper never reacted. She never talked back, never lost her composure. She took every challenge head-on, working twice as hard as the others. Some officers started respecting her, impressed by her determination, but Maddox wasn't convinced. He was waiting for the moment she cracked. The moment she realized she wasn't cut out for this life. Then one night, everything changed. The radio crackled to life, breaking the stillness of the evening. The dispatcher's voice, tight with urgency, rang through the station. "Officers needed immediately. Hostage situation in progress. Suspect is armed and non-compliant. Repeat, armed suspect holding a hostage. Negotiations have failed." Within seconds, Maddox and his team were in motion. Sirens wailed as police cars tore through the city streets, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness. Maddox gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind already racing ahead, mapping out a strategy. He had dealt with situations like this before. Hostile suspects, terrified victims, the razor-thin balance between force and diplomacy. He knew how to take control. But as soon as they arrived at the scene, the air felt different. Thick with tension. The building loomed ahead, its exterior swallowed in shadows. Officers were positioned behind cover, their weapons drawn, their eyes locked on the dimly lit entrance. A negotiator stood to the side, shaking his head in frustration. "He's not responding anymore," the negotiator muttered. "We've tried everything. He's unstable, could turn violent any second." Maddox took a deep breath, ready to take command, ready to be the one to step in and resolve the crisis. But before he could speak, Harper stepped forward. "I'll handle this," she said, her voice calm, steady. Maddox turned sharply to face her, his expression a mix of disbelief and frustration. "Are you crazy?" he snapped. "You don't have the experience for this." She didn't flinch, didn't back down. "I know what I'm doing, sir," she said, her tone unwavering. Then, after a brief pause, she added, "Please trust me." For the first time, Maddox saw something in her eyes that made him hesitate. This wasn't overconfidence, wasn't reckless ambition, it was certainty. As if she had walked into situations like this before, as if she had already seen the worst and knew exactly how to navigate it. The officers around them watched in silence, waiting for Maddox's command. He could have ordered her to stand down, could have reminded her who was in charge. But something held him back. A feeling he couldn't quite name. Against every instinct, against the years of experience that told him this was a mistake, he stepped aside and let her go in. For the first time, there was something in her voice that made Maddox hesitate. It wasn't just confidence, it was something deeper, something unshakable, a certainty that didn't come from arrogance or bravado, but from experience. He studied her, searching for any sign of hesitation in her stance, any flicker of doubt in her eyes. There was none. Against his better judgment, against every instinct honed by years of commanding authority, Maddox found himself stepping back, allowing her to take the lead. He told himself it was a test, that he was waiting for her to fail, to prove that she wasn't ready for this. But deep down, a part of him, one he wasn't ready to acknowledge, knew this wasn't a mistake. The seconds ticked by. Then minutes. The tension in the air was suffocating. Officers exchanged nervous glances, fingers tightening around their weapons, their bodies coiled and ready for action. Then, the door creaked open. A collective breath was held as Harper stepped out, her arms wrapped protectively around the trembling hostage. Her uniform was slightly disheveled, a smudge of dirt streaked across her sleeve, but her expression was composed, steady. Behind her, the suspect trailed with his hands raised, his face drawn in resignation. For a moment, no one moved. Then, as the reality of what had just happened sank in, the officers around Maddox erupted into murmurs of disbelief. Even the most hardened among them, men who had seen countless crises unfold, looked at Harper with a mixture of shock and admiration. Maddox remained frozen, watching her in silence. His mind replayed the scene over and over. She had done what few could. No violence, no bloodshed, just skill, control. Back at the station, the atmosphere remained thick with unspoken questions. Harper sat at her desk, calmly filling out her report, her pen gliding over the paper as though she had just returned from a routine patrol, instead of walking into a deadly situation and emerging victorious. Maddox finally broke out of his daze and strode toward her, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, as if to shield himself from the reality settling in. "That was impressive," he said, the words leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. He wasn't used to admitting it. "Where did you learn to do that?" Harper didn't look up immediately. She finished the last few words of her report, set her pen down, and met his gaze with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Training, sir," she said simply. "The right kind." There was something deliberate in her words, something that told Maddox she had meant for them to land a certain way. And they did. Hard. Before he could ask more, before he could demand the explanation gnawing at his gut, the station doors suddenly swung open with a commanding force. A hush fell over the room. A group of high-ranking officials strode in, their presence shifting the energy instantly. The men and women who had been relaxed just moments ago now straightened, standing at attention, their gazes sharp. At the front of the group was the police commissioner himself. Maddox's chest tightened. The commissioner only showed up in person for two reasons: commendations or consequences. And the look in his eyes told Maddox this visit wasn't just routine. The commissioner's gaze swept across the room before locking on to Harper. Then, to Maddox's shock, the commissioner's face broke into a smile. "Detective Lewis," he said, his voice filled with familiarity and respect. "It's good to see you again. I hope your transition has been smooth." Maddox's stomach dropped. "Detective?" The room, once filled with the hum of casual chatter and the occasional burst of laughter, fell into an eerie silence. The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. Maddox felt as though the ground beneath him had suddenly become unsteady, as if the very foundation of his world had just shifted. His breath caught in his throat. "Detective?" He blinked, his mind scrambling to process what he had just heard. His eyes darted from the commissioner to Harper, searching for some kind of explanation, some indication that this was some kind of cruel joke. But there was no smirk, no teasing glint in Harper's eyes. Instead, for the first time, she looked at him with something far more intimidating than quiet professionalism. Authority. She turned to face him fully, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. Gone was the so-called rookie he had ridiculed, the woman he had treated as nothing more than an inconvenience. In her place stood someone who had never once been beneath him, someone who had only ever been watching, listening, and quietly assessing. "That's right, Chief Maddox," she said, her voice steady with no hint of arrogance or triumph. "I'm not a recruit. I was assigned here by the commissioner to evaluate the leadership and performance of this department." Maddox felt the air leave his lungs in a sharp exhale. His mind reeled, cycling through every interaction, every dismissive comment, every time he had scoffed at her or thrown obstacles in her path. He had done everything in his power to make her feel like she didn't belong. And now the truth hit him like a fist to the gut. She had never needed his approval. She had never been a struggling recruit. She had been his judge from the very start. The weight of the revelation pressed down on him like an anvil. Around them, the officers who had once smirked and nodded along with Maddox's jabs now stood frozen, their eyes darting between him and Harper. Some looked confused, others deeply uncomfortable, as if realizing they had all been unknowingly part of a test. The commissioner stepped forward then, his presence commanding as he placed a hand on Harper's shoulder in a clear display of trust and respect. "We wanted someone to experience the department firsthand," he said, his voice cutting through the silence, "to see where improvements were needed. You did an excellent job, Detective. We'll be making some changes based on your reports." Maddox's stomach twisted. Changes? A cold wave of dread swept through him. This wasn't just a minor shakeup. This wasn't just about one undercover detective proving herself. This was about him, his leadership, his choices. And if Harper had been taking notes on everything, on him, then he already knew that his future in this department was far from secure. His throat went dry as he stared at her, watching as she accepted the commissioner's words with a small nod. She had never needed to put him in his place. She had let the truth do that for her. And for the first time in his long career, Chief Paul Maddox had nothing to say. Maddox's face burned with a heat that crept up from his neck to the tips of his ears. His hands curled into fists at his sides, not out of anger, but sheer disbelief. He had spent weeks belittling her, pushing her beyond what was necessary, treating her like she was nothing more than a weak, inexperienced rookie. And now, here he was, standing before her, his authority shattered in an instant. He opened his mouth, desperate to say something, anything, to regain control of the situation. Maybe an excuse, maybe an apology, maybe an attempt to justify his actions. But nothing came out. The words simply didn't exist. The weight of the moment settled onto his chest, pressing down like a stone. Harper, on the other hand, remained exactly as she had always been, calm, poised, completely unaffected by the chaos Maddox felt raging inside of him. She met his gaze, her eyes steady, unwavering. And then for the first time she allowed the smallest, knowing smile to appear on her lips. It wasn't smug or taunting. It wasn't meant to humiliate him further. It was quiet, composed, almost like she had expected this outcome all along. "I look forward to working with you, Chief," she said, her voice even, controlled. There was no malice in her tone, no trace of the resentment she had every right to feel. And yet, those simple words carried more weight than anything he had heard in years. She had won, not through arrogance, not through revenge, but through sheer competence and patience. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. Maddox stood there, rooted to the spot, his heart pounding, his mind reeling. He had spent his entire career making others feel small, reminding them that authority had to be earned in his world. But now, he was the one left standing in the aftermath, stripped of the power he had so carefully built. He watched as Harper disappeared into the station, her presence already reshaping the department he thought he controlled. For the first time in years, Chief Paul Maddox felt something foreign settle in his chest. Not just humiliation, not just regret. It was fear. Because he knew things were never going to be the same again. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more gripping tales like this, don't forget to like this video. It really helps us out. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think about this twist. And if you know someone who would love this story, share it with them. Your support keeps us going, and we can't wait to bring you more amazing content. Thanks for watching.